Hi and welcome. In this video we're going to be doing an oil change on our Moto Guzzi 750 Breva. Now our Breva does have a sump spacer fitted, so it does take more than the 1.8 litres of oil that the standard Breva takes. Now there are two drain plugs fitted to the Breva. There's one at the back and one at the front of the sump. And to get to the front one you do need to remove this chin spoiler here. I've also warmed up the engine a little bit just to allow the oil to flow a little bit more freely. You don't need to heat the engine up too hot. You really want to reduce the risk of burning yourself if you happen to accidentally spill any oil on you while you're draining it. After you've drained the oil, you should always check the magnetic pickups on each sump plug. There's a little bit of particle on that one and not much on that one. If there's large quantities of particles or chips on either of these, it could indicate that you've got a problem with the engine. The other thing I always do is change these crush washers on the sump plugs, because there's nothing worse than doing an oil change and finding that the bike is dripping oil a few days later. You can probably get away with every second service, but I change them every service. This smaller one also has a little plastic insert on it to aid in sealing. Now the next thing we'll do is remove the oil filter. It's up underneath this cover here, and it's just held in by this one bolt. And there's also a crush washer on the top of this bolt that does need changing occasionally. The cover itself is sealed by an O-ring. A little bit of oil will escape from the cover because the oil within the oil filter itself is still in there, obviously. Probably does help to wear gloves when you do this. So we just let that drain for a little while. Now because I've got the sump spacer on here, there's actually not that much room underneath it, so it is actually a little bit more difficult for me to get this particular filter out compared to a stock bike. But it's not that hard. Now we'll get everything ready. I'll just get the new filter out of the box. So that's the filter there. You'll notice there's a spring on one end that actually sits on the bottom on a standard Breva, just inside the cover there, so it goes up that way with the bolt through the bottom. On mine, because I've got the sump spacer, I've got this extra spacer inside here that sits in that cover, and mine actually goes on like that. But the average Breva won't have that. It'll just be like this. You can't get this filter in upside down. The opening at this end is a lot bigger than the opening at that end. That slides over a spigot inside the sump there, so it's not possible to get this round the wrong way. The other thing I like to do is replace this O-ring on the filter cover. It becomes quite distorted, particularly after a couple of usages. You can probably get away with a couple of usages, but for insurance, to stop leaks, I just replace it every time. It's a lot easier to just replace the O-ring. It's only a few cents for the peace of mind. The other thing I like to do is replace the crush washer that's on the end of the bolt. This bolt obviously is a bit longer because I've got the sump spacer, but there's a crush washer that goes on the bottom there. It can get quite chewed up over time. A quick fix is to file it down so that any burrs are taken off, but it's a lot easier just to replace it every second service, if not every service. So now that we've got everything ready, we've got our filter, new O-ring, crush washer there, the two sump plugs are ready to go. it's ready to put all these parts back into the bike and put the oil in. Now before I put it all together, I'll just wipe out inside this cover here, just so that there's no grit or grime on the area where the O-ring seals. So just clean that up. And then we can fit the whole assembly in. Now, as I said before, I've got an extra spacer in here because I've got a sump spacer up here. So we'll just see if we can get this in. There we have it. Now, that section there with the two prongs goes to the front. And you should feel a bit of spring tension, which means you've got it right. And there we have it, the filter's been fitted. Okay, now it's time to fit the two drain plugs. We'll just clean up around the sealing surface first, and fit the plug that we've cleaned up and put a new washer on, and tighten her up. These don't need to be over tight. You do run the risk of stripping threads because they are removed constantly for servicing. Again, just clean the area up with a rag. Now we'll just fit the chin fairing. Now it's time to put the oil in. A standard Breva takes 1.8 litres of 508/40 oil. Because I've got the sump extension on here, I'll be probably putting in an extra 700 or 800 mils. Just make sure that the funnel and everything that you're using is clean before you start putting in the oil. The last thing you want to do is put dirt back into the engine that you've taken out with your oil change. Okay, it's now time to start the bike and prime the oil system and get oil into that oil filter cavity. This does take a little bit of time, so don't rev the engine during this process because you don't want to put any undue load on the bearings while we're priming the oil system. Okay, the oil light has gone out, so we've got oil pressure now. And there we are, nearly done. All we need to do now is let the oil settle for a period of time, then check the oil on the dipstick. Now you need to check the oil with the dipstick screwed all the way in home, and it should appear near the top of that checkerboard pattern on the dipstick itself. And that's all there is to it. I'll see you next time.